Ladies, gentlemen, and rogues of all ages, one of my favorite concepts for a build for multiple seasons in a row now are ultimate focused builds, especially with Rain of Arrows for rogues specifically as a big screen-wide effect with really cool visuals attached to it. And while there have been Rain of Arrows builds that have existed in the past, never have they ever been so strong as right now, so mainstream as they are at this moment, and the big reason for that is the way that the developers reworked ultimate skills in Season 7, adding in some ultimate boosting legendary aspects as well, with the main things that make this function properly being the rank 5 bonus for Rain of Arrows, which makes its damage scale with your damage to distant enemies stat, which you can stack up quite a bit for the sake of this conversion. Then the bonus ranks that you can get through the new aspects as well, you bring the cooldown below 10 seconds, which makes it extremely resettable through the preparation class specialization, allowing you to essentially spam Rain of Arrows with extremely high damage numbers, at least once you have the right gear set up around it, which mostly includes stacking a ridiculous amount of critical hit damage through the precision key passive as well. So today we're going to go over Rain of Arrows entirely as a rogue build this season, the skill points that we take and why, the reasoning behind taking preparation, the witchcraft powers that we use to support the setup, and the occult gems to boost it further too. Then the uniques for this build, the requirements to make it function, the legendaries, the tempering, and everything to do with the affixes too, then Runewords, Mercenaries, and the Paragon board setup, followed lastly by any tips and an actual sort of rotation for playing this build from my time using it so far. Starting off then with the skill tree itself, we dump 2 points into basic skills here. You can make this work much earlier than I have here by using Heartseeker with the Shard of Rathiel unique, which makes it cost energy, which is why I do have some points into Heartseeker, but in the proper endgame version of the build that eventually becomes irrelevant because we want to ignore basic skills entirely. So we take those just so we can move on and take 1 rank into Barrage itself, with no enhancements. This is purely to have a skill in the build, which counts as a marksman skill, so it gives us precision stacks when we use it, has low attack frames, so it can be spammed quite quickly as part of a combo, and then secondarily, but important for quality of life, it is a skill that can just be held down to cast on repeat, instead of having to spam tap it to make every cast happen over and over and over again. And trust me, as crazy as it sounds, you will be glad that's a part of it by the end. We then grab 3 ranks of the sturdy passive over here for bonus damage reduction from close enemies, which is nice to have, and then we move on to the agility skill cluster. Here we'll be picking up Caltrops as a general skill, as well as its enhancement, and then also methodical Caltrops. As a whole, this gives us an ability to gain stacking damage increases against enemies that are standing in this, as well as applying chill and slow too as a bonus of this. Then we pick up dash, mostly for mobility, which should make sense as you watch me actually playing the build, because you can use dash while still holding down your other skills and still actually casting them, rather than movement, which will stop you from using other skills. So you can use dash for your movement instead of literally walking places. This combined with its enhancement as well as discipline dash 2 lets us knock down any enemies that you dash through for bonus damage coming from the malice passive as well. We then take a bunch of passive ranks in this sort of circle here, 1 rank of the rugged passive because it's essentially the rank that I end up with as a surplus, and lowering damage over time incoming against you is very useful. Then we have 3 ranks of weapon mastery, which mostly gives us bonus vulnerable damage because we are using a bow for pretty much all of our attacks, 3 ranks of trick attacks for a bunch of bonus crit chance and crit damage whenever you daze enemies, and this is just significantly and brokenly scaling right now because it just literally does not work the way it's supposed to. The reason I say this is because it does not match the tooltip. Each individual stack of this buff multiplies up the effectiveness of the last stack as well. So the total bonus with all the stacks applied on my current numbers is not 108% as the tooltip says, it's more realistic to say it's around a 165% bonus to my crit damage attacks in general, as again each stack will multiply each other, and so this is one that gets really out of hand with bonus ranks wherever you can get them. We then also pick up 3 ranks of the unstable elixirs passive for bonus damage after drinking a potion, and this also stuns nearby enemies whenever you drink, but the important part of this is that it moves your health potions to be essentially a part of your damage dealing rotation because you want this buff to be active as often as you can. Then the final passive that we take here is 3 ranks of Ballastra, essentially just for bonus damage after you do an evade. We don't evade all that often, it's sort of awkward within the setup, but whenever you can evade, this gives you just bonus damage after the fact. Then we have our subterfuge skill cluster, and here things do get a little tiny bit funky as we completely ignore the classic rogue defensive skill in Dark Shroud to instead take concealment as well as its enhancement, and then also countering concealment. We will be spam activating this skill, and so this gives us essentially constant stealth, with the idea of being that we break stealth into Rain of Arrows to trigger a large additive damage bonus from the Shroud of False Death mythic unique chest itself if you have it, but even if you don't, we also get permanent unstoppable, permanent unhindered, 60% bonus movement speed, and some bonus dodge chance too because we activate this skill more than once every 5 seconds. So this has just an absolute ton of value for us overall. We then take Smoke Grenade and daze enemies frequently and consistently, mostly just to activate trick attacks, and then its enhancement as well, which makes any enemy enemy hit by a smoke grenade take bonus damage for a few seconds afterwards too. We don't take further enhancements in this just to save the skill point, instead putting some ranks into the passives in the cluster. Specifically 3 ranks into the Malice passive for bonus damage to both vulnerable and knockdown enemies, which can be applied simultaneously, and 3 ranks of the Exploit passive, which gives you bonus damage to both healthy and injured enemies, which put together accounts for around half of an enemy's health bar. Moving on, then we have our Imbuement cluster of skills 2, where we grab 1 rank of Shadow Imbuement itself, as well as its enhancement, and then Mixed Shadow Imbuement. We apply all Imbuments automatically to Rain of Arrows, so you don't need to have skill ranks in these to have them exist to begin with, but we spend the points here specifically for the Mixed enhancement, which gives us bonus non-physical damage to enemies that are afflicted by this, and then similarly we do the same thing with Cold Imbuement for Mixed and Cold Imbuement, giving a bunch of increased damage to crowd-controlled enemies, especially if they are frozen. We then take some passive points in here too, specifically 3 ranks of the Frigid Finesse passive for bonus damage to chilled and frozen enemies, 3 ranks of Deadeye for bonus multiplicative scaling to our distant enemy damage, which helps stack up our Rain of Arrows bonus effect at rank 5 too. Then we take 1 rank of the Deadly Poison passive, mostly just as a gateway to let us get 3 ranks of Alchemical Advantage for bonus attack speed and lucky hit chance after poisoning enemies, and then 3 ranks of Debilitating Toxins for damage reduction from poisoned enemies, which will be any enemy that we actually hit. Then we move on to the Ultimate skill cluster specifically, and of course we'll be taking all 5 ranks of Rain of Arrows itself, to increase the damage, to lower the cooldown, and then activate the bonus distant damage scaling as well. We take the enhancement for bonus imbuement effects through Rain of Arrows, and Supreme Rain of Arrows as well for bonus damage to vulnerable and crowd-controlled enemies. Then we grab 3 ranks of the Unto Dawn passive over here, which gives us bonus damage with ultimate skills, and obviously as a focus of our build, it just makes a lot of sense to take that. And then you want to take exactly as many ranks as you require to reach rank 7 in Second Wind, including your tempering bonuses on gear, which I do hit when I put the Mythic Unique chest on, which I have off just to show you the skill tree. The reason is that 7 ranks of this passive will get you up to 105% of your life pool given as barrier for every 100 energy that you spend. We refresh this literally multiple times per second, and as a result, it makes us nearly immortal on top of the rest of our defensives as long as you keep hitting your abilities and spending your energy to get the barrier back. Then I've got some bonus points left that I shoved into Impetus over here, just for the occasional bonus damage when we trigger this through movement in between Rain of Arrows, and of course the final point into the key passive of Precision. This makes every 4th marksman skill a guaranteed crit with a buttload of bonus crit damage, which is part of what defines our general damage rotation that we will go over later on too, but essentially the main goal is to alternate back and forth between Rain of Arrows, then spending 150 energy on a single shot of Barrage to reset Rain of Arrows cooldown to let us cast it again, alternating between those, using our other skills to boost us as we go, and trying to line up every proc of Precision on Rain of Arrows specifically. That said, that makes our choice of specialization actually pretty clear in preparation, as this is the only one that enables us to hit Rain of Arrows as frequently as we do, and it makes it remove every other cooldown when we use that skill as well, which is what allows us to spam Concealment to activate its bonuses frequently too. After that, then we have our Witchcraft powers in the build, for which I've got Soul Harvest, which is just a massive amount of bonus dexterity that you can gain while fighting, the Aura of Siphoning for constant poison damage surrounding us, as well as healing over time for many enemies in the radius, and then Aura Specialization, which increases the radius of our auras, and importantly also gives us an increased critical damage multiplier against any enemy that is within range of the aura. The tooltip says that it is additive, but all player testing points towards this being a multiplier, and so it's quite strong as a result. We then have the Decay augmentation, which gives us bonus damage applied as poison because we're a rogue to enemies, and through Occult Gems, we also have this applied to Rain of Arrows, so we essentially apply 50% of base Rain of Arrows damage as extra poison every time that we use it. Then there's also Purging Touch, which increases all Eldritch effect damage by 40%, and again we make Rain of Arrows count as all types of witchcraft, so this increases the damage of our main damage a massive amount too, and cycles even further into Decay augmentation. Then finally for our unique power we have the Cycle, and honestly none of the unique powers are particularly great with this setup. Piranado with the pull is not necessarily a bad option, but it would require swapping a power out to have a Hex within our regular common skills, and right now the powers that we have are giving us a ton of strength, so I'm quite happy with the current layout, and I don't think that we gain much by losing any of these for a Hex just to let us use Piranado for pulling things. As for Occult Gems then, my general recommendation is Toadling's Wish for bonus common growth and decay power effect, mostly for decay augmentation and the bonus damage over time, and then we have 2 legendary Occult Gems too. Voice of the Stars makes ultimate skills count as all types of witchcraft and have bonus damage as long as you have an aura active, and then Friend of the Bog gives us bonus dexterity and maximum life for having 3 growth and decay powers active, which we do. With that covered then, let's talk about our gear and start that off with the actual Shroud of False Death mythic unique specifically. This isn't required for the build, but it's the only mythic that actually makes it stronger, and it adds quite a bit for this specific setup too. If you don't have this item, instead you'd want to just run a legendary chest chest piece with the concussive strikes aspect for lucky hit chance to daze enemies and bonus damage to dazed enemies. Past that, the actual requirements to make the build function are the Word of Hakan unique amulet especially, which applies all imbuements to rain of arrows automatically. It boosts your damage to distant enemies multiplicatively, which scales again into the rank 5 bonus of rain of arrows, and then the amulet by itself can give you maximum cooldown reduction on rain of arrows, bonus imbuement skill ranks, and ultimate skill damage, as well as a portion of the chance to deal double damage with rain of arrows stat, which we will hit 100% of combined between our gear. As well, this makes rain of arrows count as an arrow storm, which means that it is benefited by anything that boosts arrow storms, which does result in some pretty hefty damage increases. The next required bit for this then is Sky Hunter for just a massive increase to our critical hit damage above all else, as well as some bonus attack speed towards our breakpoint too, which, to put it sort of simply, is our easier goal is 116% attack speed, which gives us a 14 frame barrage cast, or if you can hit 136% attack speed total, you can get down to 13 frames as the next breakpoint, but anything gained in between those or past that is pretty much just fully wasted. That said, the most important stat on the bow itself is the chance for marksman projectiles to cast twice, as this does affect rain of arrows as basically an extra double damage dip when it triggers. So the higher the chance from this, the better. And then just a nice pile of additive crit damage on the actual weapon to scale up too. Then we have the Beastfall boots, and this is what makes the build consistent. You can use it with a not great pair of these, but it really comes into its own once you get a minimum of 25 bonus maximum resource from the boots itself. That combined with the Elixir of Resourcefulness being active would give you 150 maximum energy, resulting in our ideal rotation of rain of arrows triggering the boots' unique effects. Then we can use Barrage to full spend the 150 maximum energy through the unique effect of the boots itself, which resets rain of arrows through the preparation effect that we have too. It's worth mentioning that for these boots, the only thing that you really care about is the maximum resource, and the movement speed is nice. The ultimate cooldown reduction is actually pretty much fully taken care of by your amulet, so it's just a bonus on the boots, and again, the actual scaling of the unique effect itself isn't a big deal because you don't care about the damage that your barrage does, you care about the damage your rain of arrows does. That said, you can get to 25 bonus maximum resource relatively easily with this, which then lets you combine it with the Elixir of Resourcefulness, the specific elixir that gives you 25 bonus maximum resource, putting you up to 150 maximum, which is what enables the combo. That said, if you get a greater affix maximum resource pair of these boots, and then hit the masterworking proc on the affix 2 times, you can get to over 50 bonus maximum resource from this boots alone, which then also frees up your elixir slot for other uses. Then we have the Cowl of the Nameless Helmet, which is mostly just a big pile of passive ranks above all else, and the one that we care about most is Trick Attacks for the critical damage scaling, but Unstable Elixirs is also very good, and the second priority for greater affixes on this item. That said, we now have all of our legendary items. For the rings then, we have the Apogeic Fur aspect for increased ultimate skill damage every time that you use it, up to 10 stacks, at which point it resets and also will reset your cooldowns. Then the aspect of the Vehement Brawler, which makes casting ultimate skills increase your overall damage and gives you bonus ultimate skill ranks too. As for affixes on the gear, the ideal ones are Dexterity, critical strike damage, and attack speed to help reach the breakpoint we talked about earlier. My rings are probably my worst pieces overall as they don't have the affixes that I'm after, but this partially shows how you can use rings to fill some gaps too, as I do have some all element resist on my ring until I can get some better gloves that fill that role itself. As for tempering then, on your rings you want damage to distant enemies as your offensive temper, which is also the ideal affix for every single masterworking proc, and then resource temper you want energy gained after using rain of arrows, which between your rings and the concealment energy gained as well when stealthing is part of the rotation is what makes you shoot back up to full energy immediately after hitting rain of arrows, which then lets you spend all the energy immediately with barrage. Then for the one-handed weapons we have the Arrow Storms aspect for lucky hit chance to make arrow storms and bonus damage to arrow storms in general, as well as the Vengeful aspect for a chance to create arrow storms when hitting vulnerable enemies, as well as a further boost to arrow storm damage. And these are both mostly taken because rain of arrows itself does count as an arrow storm as part of the Word of Hakan unique effect, which means that it is fully benefited by the scaling that arrow storms get from these aspects. As for the affixes then, first up you want to actually have swords as your weapons instead of daggers for the bonus crit damage that is quite important, and the base affixes on the item that you are after are crit damage above all else, then dexterity, then maximum life. For tempers, you want chance for rain of arrows to deal double damage, and then damage to distant enemies to scale up rain of arrows, and the ideal masterworking procs are fully in on damage to distant enemies to scale even further here for rain of arrows. Then we have our gloves as well, which have the conceited aspect for up to 30% bonus damage, while we have a barrier active, which we will 100% of the time, at least in combat, because of second wind. The ideal base affixes for your gloves would be critical hit damage, dexterity, and then all element resistance instead of the ring affix that we have for that over there, and then the tempering should be bonus damage to distant enemies once once again, and then utility temper chance to freeze to help proc our frozen enemy damage boost more often, and the ideal masterworking procs on this are again damage to distant enemies. Then finally we have our pants running the frostbitten legendary aspect, mostly just for the bonus critical hit damage to frozen enemies, and to make your defensive stats work you need both flat armor and all element resistance on your pants. Then dexterity in the third affix slot. Tempering should be very importantly ranks to second wind as a passive, and then lucky hit chance to stun enemies too. As for the masterworking, your biggest priority by far is hitting procs on second wind until you can hit 7 ranks total of this passive, so it gives you a full life barrier whenever you trigger it. Following that, then we have our Runeword setup as well, which is the Zan rune for offering gained on ultimate skill use, combined with the Vex rune for bonus skill ranks when triggered. This stacks up 3 times to give us 3 bonus ranks to all skills, and it automatically happens anytime that we use Rain of Arrows, so we'll just have this active and open just pretty much all the time. Then our other rune word is going to be Pock for offering gained per resource spent, combined with Ohm for Barbarian Warcry, and the 15% damage bonus that we get from the Warcry being active, and as a result we will have this active just 100% of the time. As for your other gem slots then, emeralds all around for dexterity and armor and crit damage from weapons, and if you don't have occult gems yet, you want to fill those slots in your jewelry for your defensives as needed. After that then we have our mercenaries, with Rahir as the main one, taking the track that gives us bonus all element resistance, which is very nice to have, into inspiration for increased damage against ground slammed enemies by Rahir, or against enemies in Rahir's bastion radius. Secondarily we have Variana as the reinforcement then, with the shockwave skill to knock down enemies and activate our knockdown enemy bonus from the malice passive whenever this happens, and we have this set to trigger when we cast any skill, so it'll just happen as often as it can. And with that covered, we now have our Paragon board set up for this build as well, with the initial disclaimer that every player will generally be at a different Paragon level from each other, so if you have less points than I do, you want to focus on the general skeleton of the setup here, making sure that you hit the right glyphs, activate them, and then also hit all the legendary nodes. But once you've done that, you can fill out all the extra stuff that I have, like the 13 excess dexterity nodes on the starter board here. That said, let's start out on the starter board itself, up the left side through the all element resist and maximum life nodes, up to the glyph socket itself for the headhunter glyph. What this does as its base effect is give you a bonus effect of any normal node within the radius, which are just the general attribute gain nodes. This also gives you an extra 10% damage to elites when you activate the secondary bonus, which is quite nice, but the main effect is why I have so many dexterity nodes in the radius, as this just gives us a lot of stacking dexterity, which boosts our damage in general. We also then grab the rare nodes within the radius too, both for the dexterity to activate the glyph and for the extra damage that they give us. We get the magic nodes of actual relevance too, and we wrap around down to prime for the bonus damage and maximum life as well, before we exit out of the top side of the board here to attach on no witnesses like so, with the legendary node at the bottom side. On the left here you want to pick up color and the nodes around it for bonus non-physical damage and bonus attack speed, before going up the right side here through recuperate for bonus maximum life, up to the legendary node itself, no witnesses. This makes your ultimate skills gain bonus damage from your damage with ultimate skills bonus, and grant this effect to all of your skills after you cast it too. We have the full bonus from this, so it's just a nice constant damage increase. We then wrap up around through the training node here for bonus maximum life and resistance to all elements. We grab all the magic nodes around it because those are very, very good, and then we go up through the skillful rare node for bonus damage in general, over to the glyph socket itself, inside of which we'll be putting the combat glyph. This gives you critical strike damage for every bit of intelligence you purchase in the radius, which is very, very valuable, especially for this build, and the additional bonus makes it so that it makes skills that critically strike restore a portion of their energy cost, which also helps us keep our sort of constant flow of energy cycling right between our ultimate and barrage. We then grab the nodes needed to activate the actual effect here. We grab all the rare and magic nodes in the radius too because they're very useful. We grab the intelligence that we can afford to because again, it's a very good scaling glyph, and then we go out of the right side of the board over here to attach on the Danse Macabre board with the legendary node on the right side like this. We go down and around through the giant killer node here for bonus damage to elites, up into the glyph socket itself, in which we put the control glyph. Again, this is another very well scaling glyph. It gives us as a normal effect bonus crowd control damage for every intelligence purchased in the radius, and the secondary effect is bonus damage to slowed or chilled enemies, doubled to stunned or frozen enemies. And we have a lot of ways of both stunning and freezing enemies to activate this effect pretty much consistently. We then wrap around to the rare node within the radius as well for extra bonus damage to healthy enemies. We pick up the nodes within the radius we need to activate the effect, and then we wrap down to the ranger node here for damage reduction through distant enemies, which is nice, but also a bunch of bonus damage to distant enemies too, because we scale that significantly through our rain of arrows as well. We then wrap up into the legendary node itself for the board, which is Danse Macabre, which makes casting a mobility or subterfuge skill increase the damage of your next skill by 75%. And this is one of our sort of beautiful combos from working in concealment to the build, because concealment is a subterfuge skill. If you cast it before Rain of Arrows, not only will it put you into stealth, activating the bonus damage from the mythic unique chest, but it will also activate this bonus for Rain of Arrows as well. We then wrap around and grab both the rare nodes that are near this too, because they're quite good, including Skulker and the magic nodes around it, mostly for the resistance to all elements, which is of course fantastic, and Acrobat for the maximum life nodes that are around this as well. We then go over and up outside of the top side of the No Witnesses board like this, attaching on the Tricks of the Trade board with the legendary node in the top left. First, we make a stop on the bottom right side of the board over to Haven for both bonus maximum life and flat armor gained. We would go up to the actual glyph socket here, inside of which is the Canny glyph. This gives us increased damage with non-physical effects for every intelligence that's purchased in the radius, and it also gives us as a secondary bonus a stacking effect on enemies where every time that you hit them with non-physical damage, it increases the non-physical damage they take up to a 15% maximum. We then go up and over through the rare node over here for increased marksman damage, ignoring the other rare node in the radius because it's cutthroat damage, which means nothing to us. We grab the nodes that we need to actually activate the secondary effect as well. Then we wrap around into the legendary node for the board, which gives our marksman skills bonus damage if used within 8 seconds of a cutthroat skill. Dash is a cutthroat skill, and we use dash for our main method of movement, which means that we use dash to activate this buff constantly as well. We then move over through this rare node here for bonus damage reduction from distant enemies and extra damage to distant enemies. Up to the left side of the board, we will exit and attach on our final board, which is going to be Deadly Ambush. We go down towards the actual glyph socket itself, going through the engineering node for bonus damage to trapped enemies and some dexterity, over to the glyph socket where we put in the versatility glyph. This just increases the effect of all the magic nodes in the radius, but also has the secondary effect of boosting the damage of all non-basic or core skills. In other words, boosting ultimate skills, which is our main damage source in Rain of Arrows. We then wrap over through the ensnarement rare magic nodes around it for a bunch of extra critical strike damage, which we scale up massively, and then up towards the legendary node itself of the board, which is Deadly Ambush. This gives us increased critical strike damage as a multiplier to any enemy that is affected by trap skills, which includes caltrops to activate this effect. We then, with any remaining points that you have left, grab some extra rare magic nodes as well. We grab Cunning and the nodes around it for some damage reduction from enemies affected by trap skills, but also some more all-element resistance. And then if you're lacking poison resistance, like pretty much everyone is, you can go up into this node right up here for not just bonus poison resistance, but especially bonus maximum poison resistance, which is a very powerful thing to be able to gain from your Paragon board. And with that, we've pretty much covered everything to do with putting the character together to begin with, so let's talk about how to play it, as it can either be extremely complex or pretty simple, depending on how much you're trying to maximize and optimize the whole thing. If you want to maximize everything, you have to very specifically track the way that you cast Barrage and Rain of Arrows, doing single taps per cast to ensure that Rain of Arrows is always the skill that benefits from the precision buff. And then you would also want to cast Concealment before every Rain of Arrows, so the general rotation would be hard spamming Barrage, then Concealment, then Rain of Arrows in that order on loop, throwing a smoke grenade to daze enemies for trick attacks or for things like bosses where the extra damage boost really matters, and caltrops to activate damage bonuses too whenever it actually matters. That said, this build is strong enough that outside of everything but deep pit tier pushing, you can literally just hold the buttons down for easy recasts and to make it easier on your fingers when playing the build elsewhere. Specifically what I mean is if you hold down the Barrage button, then hold down the Rain of Arrows button, it will automatically alternate cast between them if you can. If you also then hold down Concealment's bind, it will do the same with that too, letting you get an infinite loop of the 3 abilities without spam pressing them. However, you have much less control over the order of them, so while this is good enough for pretty much most stuff in the game, the optimal way to play is individual button presses with you basically tracking precision inside of your head as you move. That said, for most stuff I just run around holding down those 3 buttons, hit a smoke grenade or caltrops occasionally and just keep going, and because of the actual cooldown resetting effect, you can also just sort of hold down the dash button for your actual movement, which will then work in dash into the rotation of skills, which will also make you be able to keep doing damage while moving without having to actually use your movement keys. As well, you of course want to make sure that you drink a potion every few seconds just to keep unstable elixirs active as often as possible. That just about does it for today, and everyone, your full detailed guide into a proper deep endgame Rain of Arrows build for Rogue in Season 7. And this thing just absolutely kicks ass right now. I absolutely recommend giving it a go if you haven't done so far. I hope you've enjoyed this then, and I hope you also enjoy using this build if you try it out for yourself. Like if you liked the video, subscribe to the notification bell for more, and most importantly, ladies and gentlemen, until next time, stay sweet.
Josh, Cotton, and Hollow with the videos, dropping the humor like a hammer on your tippy toes, bringing entertainment on a daily arrangement to take our insanity and turn it into entertainment. Yes, I said entertainment twice, to reiterate that it is nice to look into your faces on a mostly daily basis when you let us in your homes to make the whole world a stage. Goodbye.